It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined today by Mike Soubirous. He is a member of the Riverside City Council, and you are facing an issue that so many municipalities face, and that's the issue of trees and the growth of trees. Let's face it, sir. A tree can be beautiful and majestic and really change the nature of a neighborhood for the good, for the best. But sometimes those trees grow in such a way that can be hazardous. I mean, we've seen those buckled sidewalks. What's happening in Riverside as an example of any city in our great state?
Right. Well, what happened for our city is during our Renaissance period that we had and the economic turndown, the city allocated resources away from tree trimming, and it's a growing problem literally because it just keeps going, you know. And the issue is not only did we have the tree growth and we spread it out to a 8 to 9 year trim cycle, but we had some problematic trees that we weren't taking out that were tearing up the sidewalks. They were breaking limbs, falling on cars. We're replacing that. So a lot of money that would have gone to tree trimming went to liability, tort claims, sidewalk replacement.
And as I understand it, and this is not unique to Riverside, I guess in the 40s, 50s, 60s, the trees of choice really should not have been chosen.
Yes, for instance, the chamois ash.
Right, yeah. These were trees that just eat up sidewalks and drains and gutters, and what a huge mistake our grandfathers made.
Yes, well, and they didn't, I don't think anybody 30, 40, 50, and even 100 years ago, I ran across some neighborhoods that were close to 90-year-old trees, and they're cracking, you know, they're like old people. They're more brittle, you know, they get hollowed out, disease-ridden and whatnot. Not the old people, but the trees.
Exactly.
But, you know, the problem is we allowed certain trees to go in that were not necessarily the right tree because of what it puts out with pods and acorns, but also in the right space. We have trees now that are like 3 foot in diameter in some places and a 3.5 foot wide parkway. Right. So you can only imagine what it would do. And
so it really is a difficult question because, you know this, a lot of people get attached to trees.
Yes,
I mean, there is something about a tree that really, I remember when I was growing up, we had a tree in front of our house and it got knocked down by someone driving erratically, and I was just devastated. And so these trees, like you said, they're 3 feet wide, gotta be really just quite stunning, and yet at some level they may need to go.
Yes, and sadly, and probably what we would have needed to have done years ago is in certain places where there were trees that were not in the right place would be to, you know, rotate like every 5th tree, you know, replace it with something a little different or more appropriate, and, you know, every so many years replace another tree, and we didn't do that.
So what's gotten frustrating for residents of Riverside and plenty of the close to 500 cities in our state is that because governments have had less money, because you've extended trim cycles, the trees have been literally overgrowing, dropping pods everywhere, falling on cars, cracking sidewalks, kids are tripping, and they've become very angry. There have been some suggestions, hey, why not just turn over ownership of that area of the sidewalk to the resident and let them be responsible?
Well, a number of residents did say that when I walked neighborhoods and discussed the trees, and they said, you know, we have to live with the effect of it. Chamois ash is putting out these pods that people were showing me that they couldn't grow their grass and that they were filling up a trash can about every 2 to 3 days. They said they were a slave to their tree. They're required to water it. They're required to, you know, have it in front of their house, but they can't trim it, and they really have no say over it. So, you know, it's that dynamic. And then we've got other areas of our city, like in the Ward 4 area that has...
Which is?
Pretty much like... well, Mission Grove and areas up in that way and up toward what used to be Woodcrest. Those areas, they build the curb and then the sidewalk and then a tree that the developer puts in, but not necessarily a street tree. So see, they're less sympathetic to, well, wait a minute, we don't have that problem. Why are we paying for all these trees? So there's a lot of differences.
So what about the notion of turning over ownership? I know that idea has been floated. What did your constituents say? What did the residents say of this great city?
Well, actually, without getting too funny, I went out on a limb to kind of put that idea out because I knew that would be our worst case scenario. If we're not going to maintain our trees, properly, and we're not going to trim them within the right time cycles, maybe that is the best way. It's not what I was promoting 100%, but I was trying to put out there this is an option if we're not willing to trim the trees properly. So a lot of people were very concerned, mostly in the Ward 1 area, which is mostly downtown, a lot of trees and a lot of older homes, and they were afraid that residents would hack the tree or cut it down and not replace it, and then we would have less trees producing oxygen, and,
Right.
and you can see the concern. And if we are what we consider ourselves a city of trees, are we going to be just going against that grain, so to speak?
So I remember in the last decade, Los Angeles, the city, had developed what's known as a 50-50 program, whereby, because it used to be the city's responsibility to entirely
Yes.
deal with broken sidewalks, and they have like a 100-year wait.
Yes.
And so what they were doing is, well, if you'll pay 50%, we'll pay 50%, we the city,
Yeah.
and it put it on the top of the list. And the program did fairly well. When the recession hit,
Right.
it went away.
Yeah.
But what's your sense of maybe a partnership on these issues?
I don't think Riversiders are ready for that. I think that they feel that their city has been maintaining these trees and putting them in and doing a good job so far, up until about 5-6 years ago, and that's when we went from about anywhere from 2 to 4 year
Right.
cycles, depending on the type of tree, up to an 8 to 9 year cycle. And then that's
And
when
that's
we started.
Right.
Yes,
And
that's when
that's but that's a trimming issue.
Yes, that's a trim issue. And then we started seeing the problematic issue going around with the chamois getting to a certain age,
Right.
where the sidewalks, curbs,
Right.
gutters, and it's accelerating very rapidly.
So let's talk about the trim issue for a second.
Yeah.
So what's the plan on trimming?
Well, the plan is our land use committee has recommended to city council, and they haven't gone there yet,
Right.
but land use has heard this. They want to propose to city council that we find some funding to back off from that 8 to 9 year
I
trim
see.
cycle and bring it back to a more reasonable time frame. However, there's the other issue, and that's the damage repair that brings on the tort claims and ruins our infrastructure.
From the trim question.
Yeah, that's actually more the root problem.
So let's talk about the roots,
Okay.
because that to me is the most problematic.
Yes, it is.
I mean, these sidewalks literally buckle in such a dramatic way.
Yes.
I mean, in my neighborhood, I don't live in Riverside, I'll go bike riding with my daughters. I mean, I'm literally, it's like I'm going off a ski jump.
Yeah.
I mean,
You had a
with some-
skateboard, you'd be really putting on a
literally.
show.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And I just think to myself, this is not good.
Yeah.
This is dangerous.
Yes, it is.
And so what's happening on that front with these broken, cracked ski jump sidewalks?
Well, from the land use committee, their recommendation is that we start more properly following the policies that we had, and that is, even though it may not be a disease tree, if it's on our list as being a known problematic tree like the chamois ash, and we have sidewalk, curb, and gutter issues, and ironically, most of these trees were planted right above the sewer and water line. I have no idea why, but in most cases they were. And when they see that trend going on, or they recognize the problem, they are going to be far more judicious,
Right.
or they're going to swiftly take these things out and
I have that problem. I mean,
Yeah.
I literally had the most majestic tree grow right into my pipes and
Yes.
flood my entire home.
There you go. And that's something huge to deal with.
And so where do we go from here, though? Because, decreasing the trim cycle, not that much more expensive.
Right.
Replacing sidewalks, that's expensive.
Right, and we've got a lot of them to replace. I mean, literally hundreds
Right.
and hundreds of curb, gutter, sidewalk. And not only that, we're replacing people's driveways where a city tree is rooted in, or even block walls, and in some cases, even foundations.
So
and
where
the
do you
expense
get
is
that
phenomenal.
money? Where do you call insurance? I mean, is it can you rely on the
No,
city?
we're self-insured, and what's going to have to happen is that we're going to have to remove these problem trees, and then as we are able to, give a replacement of a good tree that's on a
What about
list.
partnering with one of these arbor societies to help maybe get trees for free or whatever, somehow.
Yes, well, I mean, we do have the program with our Riverside Public Utility for the trees for, cooling houses and
Right.
things like that, and keeping the neighborhoods more shaded. So we already have that program in effect. So we are able to get these trees through that funding, and we do have a list of what trees are not, as of, that we know now,
Right.
problematic, we've learned. So the ability to replace that tree is there. Now, replacing the curbs, gutters, sidewalks, and everything else is going to take a little bit more time, but if we can stop that tree growth and replace it with a tree that's more acceptable, then we can start replacing
So
these
is
sidewalks.
land use considering funding for the broken sidewalks as well?
Well, yes, and that's already what's draining the trim cycle, so it's exacerbating the problem.
It's a very troubling issue, but I'm sure it's one you'll stay on top of. His name is Mike Soubirous. He is a member of the Riverside City Council. My name is Brad Pomerance. I thank you so much for joining us on Charter California Edition.